Welcome to TLC at Home, the weekly podcast about making it through the lockdown, the stay-at-home protocol, with your sanity and spirituality intact. I'm Renee Schlepfer. Glad you could join us today. Hey everybody, Renee here along with my wife Lori. How's it going, Lori?
It's going great.
And people may hear meowing in the background, our cat. We're recording this in what's become my home office, my daughter's old bedroom, and the cat's outside. We locked the door because we don't want her to bother us, and yet I think this microphone is picking up her meowing. But that's okay.
That's all right.
We're all working from home these days.
Home.
And hey, today we are going to be talking once again to Arlene Auerbach. Arlene is a licensed marriage and family therapist who attends TLC, and she's got some great thoughts on her observations among her clients and with the research she's doing. But before we get to Arlene, let's talk a little bit about what we're reading these days. Lori, you've had your nose in many books, as have I.
Yep.
What are you reading that you're enjoying?
Yes, when I'm not out gardening, I find myself turning to books, and I'm not a big fiction reader normally, but I have been enjoying some fiction, including I am rereading the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Oh my goodness, Tolkien is just the best.
Every night you are just buried in those books. So what's drawing you to them?
Of course, I've read these books before, so it's not the suspense that is drawing me, but I love the way Tolkien writes. I love his turn of phrase. There's certain places in the book that I look forward to reading because of the way he describes it, and he's just a master at telling a story. You
know, I've been reading a book. In fact, I just finished it, this big 2-volume work about Mark Davis. He's one of the original Imagineers for Walt Disney. He was an animator for Walt Disney, and he's really a legend. And this book is filled with his drawings on every page and all kinds of stories about how he came up with the ideas for Pirates of the Caribbean and Small World and some of the characters that he drew. And his art is just amazing. And I think for some of the same reasons that you like Lord of the Rings, Tolkien is just a great craftsman. I just love seeing this great work. And frankly, I think that's one of the things where in the Bible, in Philippians 4, Paul says to think on the things that are true and excellent and praiseworthy. He doesn't just say, think about the religious things that are true and excellent and praiseworthy. It's just anything that has excellence as part of its character, I think is inspiring. And I think reading good books and looking at great art does that. And then you're reading another book that I think you're really enjoying. And I'm intrigued because I haven't read it yet myself. So tell us about this.
Yes, it's called Bearing God's Name, Why Sinai Still Matters by Dr. Carmen Joy Aiims. And what I love about this book is she's an Old Testament scholar. She's a great writer. She's really clear and concise. It's not a long book. It's only 180 pages or so, explaining basically the 10 Commandments, the law, the whole story of the Exodus and Sinai and the law and how that all fits into the big picture of what God is doing in the world and why it's still very important.
Because I think a lot of people look at the Old Testament and the 10 Commandments, and they just assume it's either irrelevant or they wrongly assume that's the heart of the Bible, and if we all keep the 10 Commandments, then that's what the Bible's about. But she doesn't take either one of those stances, and I think that's intriguing. So tell us the name of the book again.
It's called Bearing God's Name, Why Sinai Still Matters by Dr. Carmen Joy Aiims, I-M-E-S.
Hey, Laura, you were telling me that you were reading some alarming stats about divorce recently. What were those again?
Well, I read this morning that divorce lawyers are getting a lot of phone calls right now because couples that normally don't really spend a lot of time together maybe are spending a lot of time, and there's a lot of unresolved issues, and it's leading them to the divorce courts, which is very sad. Yeah,
so relationship tips, that's one of the things I asked Arlene Auerbach about. She's kind of become one of our resident therapists that we check in with from time to time on this podcast. So she's going to be talking about grief and about relationships and about anxiety in my interview. Well, Arlene, thank you so much for being on again. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you for asking. Holding steady.
Holding steady.
Some days have a little more tension than others. But overall, I have not too much to complain about.
I know. That's what I keep thinking too. You said something really interesting to me the other day. You said that what people are maybe not understanding is that they're going through grief. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for me?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a form of grief. People are starting to write about this in different articles and such. But we're going through loss. Some people actually have lost people because of the illnesses, the virus and such, or people that were sick anyway in the last phase of life. So, of course, they're grieving the loss of loved ones and friends. But there's the other kind of loss, too, the loss of our regular lives. I mean, most of us, had friends and family around. We were exercising, going to a gym here and there, going to work. Kids were going to school. The everyday things of life have come to a halt. And people are grieving the loss of the life that they had several months ago that's changed dramatically. I mean, even the freedom to go to a grocery store and not stand in line. I mean, every day we go to a shop and there's new rules. You have to wear a mask. You don't have to wear a mask. You can bring your bags, reusable bags. No, you have to use the paper. There's constant daily change. You can go to the beach, and you can't go to the beach. You can go to a park, you can't. So people are responding emotionally to all this chaos and constant change and uncertainty. And there's a loss process that goes on. And so some people are feeling angry and irritable, which we do when we have losses. Some people are a little quicker to get to acceptance of what I can change and what I can't change, where I have control and where I don't. Some people are getting very anxious and depressed, thinking about the future. What's our new life going to be like? What's going to be the same and what's going to be different?
I think that's so helpful to think about it in terms of grief. You sent me a great article with a psychologist, an interview with a psychologist who's an expert on grief, and he talks about the classic stages of grief we've heard about. There's denial, which a lot of us were at early on. This virus won't affect us. This is ridiculous, right? Denial.
Yes.
And there's anger. The governor's making me stay home. The government is taking away my activity, that kind of anger about it. And then there's bargaining, like, okay, Lord, if I social distance really good for 2 weeks, then everything is going to be the same as it was before, kind of bargaining. And then there's sadness. No one knows when this will end. It's a disaster, just complete sadness. And then finally, acceptance. This is happening, and I'm in the middle of it, and I just have to figure it out. Somebody I heard, I love this analogy. They said, all the other stages of grief, it's like you're trying to swim upstream against the current. But sometimes things happen in life where you just have to float downstream with the current. For me, that's more helpful as an attitude. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And also, all those phases that you identified that were written about in that article also emphasize the fact that we can go through all of those. It's not linear. We can go in and out of those phases from day to day, week to week, minute to minute sometimes, and to just know that that's a natural reaction to sustained chronic tension and uncertainty, and what we're feeling, not just as individuals or a country, but even globally, and we will go in and out of those things.
I love that.
Agree. And I like the analogy of floating down river. Sometimes you just gotta float and see where it takes you, and not resist so much. Sometimes it's easier on you when you can get to that acceptance a little faster.
And actually, it enables you to be proactive. Like, okay, I'm floating down the river, but there's still stuff I can do. Acceptance doesn't mean passivity,
It gives you energy that is otherwise drained from you.
We're experiencing grief in a way that almost no one ever gets to experience it. And that is... every single person on the planet right now gets it.
Yes.
Usually when I'm grieving, the rest of the world isn't grieving. But That's now, kind of everybody gets it. But they may all be at different stages. You may be at the stage of acceptance while your spouse or your neighbor or your coworker is still in the stage of anger.
That's very important to tune into that. That's a really important observation that you made. because we are all in different, in a day we can be in different
Right.
places with this. And so it's really about trying not to judge yourself or others, to be more accepting of that there's going to be a lot of emotional ups and downs, and the people around us are going through that too. We're not always going to be aligned and in the same spot. And that, if you can just have a little, well, grace, I think is the word that comes to mind. Have a little more grace and empathy for oneself and for the others around us, I think would go a long way.
We were just talking about grief and the fact that our spouse or our friend or our child may be at a different spot in grief than we are. So that brings me to the point of just sort of general relational tension that can happen during this time. You know, we're sheltering in place all together, and sometimes we can get on each other's nerves. So you're a licensed marriage and family therapist, so you gotta give us all some hope here and some tips. What do we do when we start getting on each other's nerves?
Yeah, it's a really good point you're making, and it's going to happen. If it hasn't already, it's going to. So get prepared. Well, what few things that I would suggest is to, during the course of the day, if you're a parent, give your kids a certain time of the day to have some timeouts where they can do some free play, even if it's limited within the confines of your home or your yard. They need some free time. But a very important thing is to create some structure. What people are telling me is that from day to day they're losing a sense of what day it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very disorienting. So it would be good if you could, is to institute, and it doesn't have to be rigid, but just some kind of daily structure so everybody knows on Monday we do these things, on Tuesday we do these things, to get a sense of a different day of the week, like they would have had if they were going to school or people were working. So get a structure, get a routine, try to hold to it as best you can.
Right.
And the other thing I would suggest is if people are living with other people, that the adults have a separate time to have what I call a business talk. And that means things like budgeting, finances, paying bills, chores, who's going to take the kids where and when, strategizing talk. It should be separate from more kind of recreational, romantic time.
Would you schedule sort of a business talk time?
I would, and you try to hold to it. And again, this is not about being rigid. But find a time that makes sense when you know the two of you can be alone without a lot of distraction to take care of, the business part of running your lives. And really hold to it as whatever you can tolerate. If it's 10 minutes or half an hour, whatever you've got, and then know that there's another time you can pick it up either in a few days or, once a week, whatever works for you. 2 times a week, 3 is probably the most. But even if it's just once a week, just sit down and talk about the things that you're worried about or concerned about or that need to get taken care of, quite frankly. And I would separate that time from the more recreational, fun, romantic time.
Yeah, that's
where
good.
You listen to music, you watch movies, you dance, whatever you do in your home to have fun, play games, whatever.
Right,
but it should be separate. You don't want the business to blur into the fun time, and you don't want to be distracted by things when you're talking about serious issues.
And I would say that probably bringing up random, irritating business-related things at 11 p.m. when you're both settling down in bed, that's probably not the best time to schedule it, right?
Good point.
Nothing good can come out of that.
Nothing good will come of that.
Right.
Yes, it should be a time when people are calm and relaxed. Maybe after a meal, for instance.
Right.
You could take a walk if you want to.
Right, that's a good idea. Take a walk together. Yeah.
Yeah, but it should be a time where you can really listen to your partner, to your spouse, and really hear what's on their mind, so that you can attend to it as best possible.
Right. Arlene, just quickly, I want to touch on one other article that you sent me, and thanks again so much for sending those. It was an article about how you can tell if your coronavirus anxiety is getting serious. So why don't you address that a little bit? How can you tell if you're experiencing more than just kind of normal anxiety through this? And what do you do about it?
Okay. So what I would look for is patterns that go on week after week of poor sleep. That means you're having trouble either falling asleep or you're waking up many times during the nighttime, or you're having really disturbing nightmares. If it goes on for several weeks into a month, maybe, you'll have to judge it for yourself, but that's something to notice, your sleep patterns. Also, are you ruminating? Are you constantly thinking about the bad news out there? There's plenty of bad news, and we're being bombarded. So I'll talk about what to do about some of these things after I go through the list. But are you constantly thinking about yourself or others getting sick, what's going on politically, culturally? If you're constantly thinking of the bad news, that's a sign. Apathy. Are you losing interest in the activities that used to bring you joy? Maybe you were somebody that loved to exercise or paint or play piano or cook, and you just have no interest at all. That's a sign. Are you feeling overwhelmed and a strong sense of helplessness? It goes back to what we talked about before. If you're focused on what you can do, you feel less hopeless. But if you're constantly feeling that nothing that I do is going to change how I feel or my situation, it's helpless, hopeless, that's the problem. And of course, the obvious, if you're having thoughts of suicide, hurting yourself, or I would say even hurting others, those are the signs that you are struggling and you have serious, serious anxiety.
And then what do you do about it?
Please, if this is going on for you, please reach out and get a referral to a mental health professional. They can help you with this. They're trained to deal with these things. And you can trust that it's not permanent. Learn some relaxation and breathing exercises. They're online, and you can just Google that and get some practice in deep breathing and relaxation techniques. And, a really important one on that article's list was practicing gratitude, which you talked about earlier. And then focusing again on what you can control and what you can't. They talked about what we talked about earlier, too, about creating a structure and routine. Limiting your exposure to media, not being on Facebook or emailing or watching TV too much. Pick a time of the day where you do that, but don't let it go on and on and on. And
Right.
People would say that they really like to laugh at this time. It's almost like dark humor in a way, but jokes. I mean, there's so many videos and jokes online. I'm getting them every day. I don't know if you are.
Oh, yeah.
So if you can laugh, that's really, really important to find some humor in the absurdity of the situation. It's around us if you know where to look.
And I know
And
that's
then,
hard for some people. Some people have told me that
Yes,
they're
it is.
offended by that, but I personally find it necessary to laugh and to just get that part of my body moving again,
Yes. Well, laughter is biochemical. It makes us feel. It elevates our mood. It makes us feel happier. It makes us feel better. And you've spoken about this other one about choosing optimism. People don't realize it takes a practice. Okay, these things are not natural to us. Sometimes it really does. It's like a discipline. But you can choose optimism over pessimism. You could train your brain when it starts to get really dark and negative to think about what you're grateful for instance, and to try to look for something that you're looking forward to, whether it's a new baby being born in the family, or a wedding, or a graduation. Those are some of the losses people have had, not being able to celebrate those things as we used to.
Yeah.
But they can be celebrated in creative ways, and to choose optimism. Life will go on. The cycle of life is a powerful force, as you know.
Yeah.
And then, I would say, learning to pray or meditate, even if you're not a Christian, even if you don't have a strong belief in God. There are times where I have habits. And you taught me a while ago, it's okay to ask God to help us with our disbelief.
Right.
And to help us with our ambivalence sometimes. That's okay to acknowledge that.
I believe, help my unbelief. That's so honest, because that shows
honest.
you can have both belief and unbelief in you at the same time. And I think most people understand that, and I love that Jesus doesn't rebuke the guy. That's acceptable.
Well, especially now.
Let's wrap up with that, because Arlene, I know you are a Messianic Jew, a person who is Jewish, who has found faith in Jesus as Messiah. And that means you're so tied into the Jewish culture and the Jewish stories in the Hebrew scriptures. And I'm doing so many of them in this series that we're in right now at church. There is hope, going back to stories like Esther, stories when God's people looked like all hope was lost. In fact, when you look in the Bible for stories of people who stayed the course when all seemed hopeless, there's like hundreds of stories in the Bible like that. You can almost not find a story that's not about that. How important it is and how enriching is it for you in a time like this to look back at your own heritage as a Jewish person and back at Scripture and see those stories? Does that inspire you?
Oh, well, of course. Of course it inspires me. And it sort of integrates the way I was raised. I'm a second-generation American. My grandparents were immigrants. I sadly don't know all the details of their story, but they were persecuted in the countries that they came from. And they didn't give up, They didn't give up, and they had the courage and the fortitude to come to this country and start new lives, learn new languages. It's beyond me when I think about that. And so all the teachings of these Bible stories, you can now that we're going through this pandemic, my gosh, all the plagues and all the things that are described in the Bible, it seems like, well, yes, it carries on. And the people, my family, stories I heard is that they still practiced their Jewish rituals and traditions no matter what country they were living in, no matter how much money they had or didn't have. They always would gather, and that's my heritage, my memory of being a child and growing up with that religion and that culture is family and friends and coming around to celebrate God, the Sabbath, Hanukkah, Passover, whatever, that brings people together to share food and to praise God, and it kept us steady. It kept us steady and strong when there were good times and when there were not so many good times. And I think that's today what we're going through. People are searching for those rituals, those traditions, having faith, and seeing that this is historical. This is not new.
Right.
What's happening to us. This has been going on for thousands of years.
Yes.
And I think it gives people new perspective.
Well, Arlene, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, well, thanks for asking me to chat.
Well, Lori, I want to build on something that Arlene talked about, and that's gratitude. You found an article in the Wall Street Journal that I'm looking at right here, and it talks about the important way gratitude helps us stay resilient during this time. It says, reminding ourselves what we're grateful for is one of the most powerful ways we can boost what mental health experts call the psychological immune system. You've heard about the immune system that protects your physical health. Well, a strong psychological immune system helps you stay mentally resilient. And gratitude boosts your mental health immune system. And then they give about 5 or 6 tips on how to stay grateful. And Lori and I just want to close by going through some of those. Again, this is just so biblical. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, Paul tells us, always be thankful, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. It's God's will for us to be grateful in all circumstances. So how do we do that now? Well, the first thing that they recommend is to prepare yourself to be grateful by spending some time in nature, or listening to relaxing music, or slowing down. You need to reading your Bible, praying. You need to get into the right frame of mind. And then what's another one of the tips that they give here?
Keeping a gratitude journal. What a great idea to write down things you're grateful for each day. Some days you wake up and you go, this can't be happening, this pandemic. This is a nightmare. So you really do have to be intentional about what you are grateful for.
Yeah, one of the other tips is to give back. They say when you are engaged in acts of compassion, then that raises your gratitude level. And let me just kind of jump in here and plug tlc.org/help. If you need help, or if you'd like to find find ways to give help, you can always go to tlc.org/help and find out some ways you can do that. And what is one of the other tips that they give in this article?
Well, it's ironic, but think about things that have happened to you in the past that were bad. Because recalling your worst times can make you grateful that you made it through, grateful for what you learned from that and how it made you stronger. And so it gives you perspective for what you're going through now.
I love that. Being grateful doesn't mean just looking at the positive. It means actually looking in your past at the bad times.
Right.
And remembering, but I'm still here. I survived. And then a couple more. One is focus on the future. Think of the reunions. Imagine how good it's going to feel to eat at your favorite restaurant again or get back to your favorite hobby again. And then what's another one that they talk about?
Watch your language. Use thankful words, gifts, blessings, abundance. He says that less grateful people are preoccupied with burdens, curses, deprivations, and complaints, and their words reflect that focus.
Yeah, that's good. And by the way, they're quoting Dr. Robert Emmons, who's a professor of psychology at UC Davis. And I've had the privilege of meeting Dr. Emmons. He actually gave me one of his books and signed it for me. And I met him when I was speaking at a men's retreat, and he is a member of one of the churches where I was speaking to. And so he is a believer himself and bases a lot of these principles in Scripture. So just
awesome.
Great reminders from Dr. Emmons and from Arlene Auerbach about how to stay mentally healthy during this time and relationally healthy too. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Lori and I love bringing you these podcasts from our home to yours. We will be praying for you. We love you. We hope you can join us. We miss you so much. Join us in the live stream this weekend. Go to tlc.org/live Saturday night at 6 p.m., Sunday morning at 9 and 10:45. And don't forget, if you are listening to this podcast in a podcast app, hit the subscribe button because that really helps the word get out. God bless you. We'll see you next time on TLC at Home.